What I'd like to do then is introduce the next section of the presentation, which was recorded ahead of time by BrentKay, who is the superintendent in Orange Southwest Supervisory Union. There are two minor glitches in the sound, so you'll notice the narration in the first slide is cut short, and some of the later slides have background noise, but it is clear and should be manageable for you to hear. As you see the title, Things to Consider When Developing a School Budget, the design here is to provide a broad context for thinking about our budgeting work, moving that to the supervisory union level with a focus on equity. This is work that BrentKay does with his boards in the beginning of the budgeting process. Some of the supporting documents that he uses in Orange Southwest will be attached to the webinar when we post it on our website following tonight's presentation. So with that introduction, I will move to Brent's presentation.
The first thing I'd like to say is, having come from the world of corporate finance many years ago and moving into education, is that the world of educational finance is far more complicated than that of corporate finance. For example, as officials in the public education system, our primary charge is to ensure that all children receive an equal education. Unlike private corporations that primarily exist to make profit, public schools exist to ensure all children receive the equal education opportunity that we talked about in the last slide. Most of us are familiar with the steps that states take to ensure equal educational opportunity, or EEO, for example, Acts 60 and 68. However, when local school boards develop their budgets, there are things they should do also to ensure that resources are allocated in a way that promote equal opportunities or equity for all children. Many of you will recall the Brigham case of 1996, where it was proved that Vermont's funding system at that time did not provide an EEO for all children. There are two principal tenets of equity. The first is horizontal equity, which means treating equals equally, and that means that all towns must have equal spending power for equal taxation. The second is vertical equity, which means treating unequals unequally, and in short that means that the funding formula in the state must ensure that towns who have extraordinary costs that are unique to their area must receive additional funding to offset those costs. And an example of that would be a town with extraordinarily high special education costs versus a town that has extraordinarily low special education costs. The funding formula in the state of Vermont therefore must offset the extraordinary costs in the district that is incurring those costs. In response to the Brigham case, the Vermont legislature enacted Act 60 in 1997 and Act 68 in 2003. While in 1997 the legislature responded quickly with Act 60 to deal with inequity, it realized shortly after that it needed to take further steps. So in 2003 it enacted Act 68, which effectively centralized all tax revenues dedicated to education into the education fund, which exists today. Through the enactment of Act 60 and 68, the state legislature in Vermont ensured our funding formulas provided for an EEO for all children. However, at our level, boards and administrators have a primary role to ensure that we allocate the funds we receive in a way that ensures all children receive EEO in schools across our district.
So that leads naturally to your question here. How can boards of a supervisory union develop budgets that ensure EEO in all schools within their jurisdiction?
All right, there are several things we can do. First, we can make sure that a vision and mission statement is in place in our schools and that everybody understands them, that goals and desirable outcomes or desired outcomes are in place. And those are important because when we develop budgets, we should make sure that our budgets align with what those desired outcomes and the vision and mission of the school are. And there are simple things like looking at our school budgets collectively across all schools, make sure that a budget process is in place, or make sure that the board sets budget parameters before the process of budgeting begins.
So Brent, before we go on to this next slide, I have a follow-up question. With respect to EEO, how can boards achieve the directives they need to follow regarding equal educational opportunity and still respect and really promote the values and goals that they hold locally?
That's a really good question because people will often confuse what you need to do to ensure EEO with a cookie-cutter approach, and it's not that way at all. To achieve EEO, you have to make sure that resources are allocated across the district in an equitable way. By doing so, you actually provide local schools the monetary resources they need to actually develop and reflect curricular practices, field trips, community involvement initiatives, anything like that in creative ways that are very unique to their local schools. If you don't allocate your resources equitably, what inevitably happens is one school will get the lion's share of curricular resources or technology resources or whatever you want, and the other schools won't have those resources and therefore lag. And that's what leads to inequitable opportunities. All right, moving on to the purposes of budgets. And before we do this, I want to state that later we're going to get into providing you with explicit examples and tools that you can use within your school system that hopefully can help you keep focused on what the purposes of budgets are. Now here is just a brief example of 6 statements of why you develop budgets. And they're relatively straightforward. You can read through them. It really is a statement of what's important. It also is a means to ensuring equal educational opportunities for all children, and that's what we've explored over the last 10 to 15 minutes. And there are multiple of other reasons, so these are just samples of those, of the purposes of developing budgets.